Welcome to the Inside Sales Enablement Podcast. Where has the profession been? Where is it now? And where is it heading? What does it mean to you, your company, other functions, the market? Find out here. Join the founding father of the sales enablement profession, Scott Santucci, and trailblazer Brian Lambert as they take you behind the scenes of the birth of an industry. The Inside Sales Enablement Podcast starts now.
Hi, I'm Scott Santucci.
And I'm Brian Lambert, and we're the Sales Enablement Insiders. Our podcast is dedicated to helping sales enablement leaders understand the big questions they should consider in order to be successful with sales enablement. In this podcast, we rethink, revisit, reframe, and confront reality about sales enablement. And today, it's a topic that I find extremely important and actually extremely relevant in today's world, and that's sales coaching. Scott, what do you have for us?
What I have for us, so we're actually recording this. So as you probably can imagine, we record these things in batches, and we're actually recording this July 31st. And we had posted out in June on LinkedIn how grateful we were to our audience that within 6 weeks we'd had 1,000 downloaders. And I put it out there. Please, it's very helpful for getting notes like this are great. We'd really ask you if you could put them out on LinkedIn so more people can see it and more people can get the word. But Rachel wrote me a note on LinkedIn, and here's what she said. I'm one of the 1,000 downloadees, question mark, smiley face, loving your podcast. Would love an episode on first line manager onboarding or what I'm deciding to name reboarding. Insert Scott joke or waterboarding. Haha. That's not me. That's my own joke. So apparently it didn't go over because Brian typically is a good audience for me. So if you're driving around, you know that Scott has some bad jokes sometimes. So back to what Rachel said. I'm utterly convinced the reasons the percentage of first level sales managers failing at their first management role is because of this. Companies take for granted that a high potential rep who's been inside the company for a couple years knows 80% of what it takes to be a sales manager, when the reality is more like 20%. From a different view of systems and tools to transitioning from a player to a coach, there are so many ways to set successful sellers up to fail. It's a wonder people sign up for it. Rachel, the reason they sign up for it is they don't know. They don't know what they don't know yet. But anyway,
once they've come to grips with the fact that they might not get paid as much, they're good.
Right. So it's back. Right. Right. Back to it. I'm in the early stages of building a manager onboarding program. We should have in place 6 months ago. We should have had in place 6 months ago, and love to hear your thoughts. Very happy to contribute also. We're also building a business case for an internal sales onboarding podcast at the moment with myself as the host. Great, Rachel. I'm not sure if you want to listen to how we're doing it, but that's awesome. So would love a real world opportunity to speed leaders' time to yes on it. So those are that's some of the questions. So in response to Rachel's email, that's what we're talking about today.
Very cool. Speed of business. Love it. So, then that's a good question. Now that you've sprung this on me, I'll spring it back to you since you always do the framing out. How are you going to frame this one out? Or was Rachel framing it out for us?
Right. So what we've learned is one of the more popular elements of our podcast is a framing story. So on this one, I'm using it to give you a voice of your peers, but also encourage you. Please use the email engage@insidese.com. I guess I'll take emails from LinkedIn too, but we want to hear your thoughts. So with that, here's the segue. I'm a Redskins fan, and I'm going to use a football example because it's our podcast and I get to. And the football example.
So this will only take a second for all you that want to turn it off right now, either because you're not a Redskins fan or you can't stand football analogies. This is only going to take 30 seconds. So hang in there.
Yeah, hang in there. And for those of us who are Redskins fans, we're suffering, so we have to live in the golden era. And the golden era of Redskin football is the Joe Gibbs era. And if you don't know Joe Gibbs is incredibly Christian. He does not curse. He finds players if they curse in his presence. He looks really, really nerdy. He admits that he's really, really nerdy. And just everything about him is incredibly by the book. And one of the things that he did as a coach, he really only focused more or less on three things. He focused on one metric. The one metric he focused on all of his football teams was turnover margin. We're not going to win football games if we turn the ball over more than our teams do. Now, keep in mind, Joe Gibbs is regarded as an offensive guru and really complex offenses and had a lot of success, but that was his number one driving thing. The second thing that he concentrated on, equally important, was make sure people know the plays. Period. End of subject. You have a job to do on the team. Be the job. Do the job. Period. End of subject. The third thing that's interesting about Joe Gibbs is that he really loved people to be themselves. And one of his favorite players of all time actually is a guy named John Riggins. And if you don't know who John Riggins is famous in the Washington, D.C. area if you grew up. He was a extreme character. He actually had it wasn't a house, part of it where he lived in one of those short order office warehouses, so he could drive his truck in and park it in the warehouse part when he was driving drunk. He also told the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, the Supreme Court judge, when he was literally drunk under a table one time and she was saying, have some respect. He said, relax, Sandy, baby. That's an example of somebody you wouldn't think somebody like Joe Gibbs would like, but John Riggins was one of his favorite players because he did the other two things really well. So why are we talking about this and coaching in this kind of discipline? Here's the thing that's fascinating. What's fascinating about Joe Gibbs is he's the only coach in the history of the NFL to win 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. And to me, the moral of the story there is what he did was he coached through a system, and he didn't coach about individual people. But his system was rigid enough to where he encouraged people to be their unique selves by being their unique selves, as long as they didn't turn the ball over and as long as they knew what their role was. So that's our centering story.
All right. So now that we have the Redskins history,
I can go more.
Circa 1975 or what? 1982.
1980 was when he was
1980. So what does that have to do with Rachel's question and her framing email that you sent, that you just read? What does that have to do with that, and what does that have to do with sales enablement?
So what this has to do with that is if you look around, there is a lot of people talking or shouting about frontline sales managers and making them successful. Sometimes we call it we in sales enablement call it the force multiplier, and let's get sales managers to enable reps and things like that. But as much as we talk about it, and as much as it's been discussed for, frankly, decades, it's just really not happening. So the reason that we're having a conversation here is I'm curious to get from you, Brian, what is actually frontline sales coaching? What does it mean? Because when I look at it, I've seen examples that look more like life coaching. I've seen examples that look like here's the prescription of what you should do, and there's no deviance whatsoever. And then from my perspective, I tend to track to sports. I was a coach. I was a coach for a swim team for 4 years. I was a coach for my kids' flag football team. I identify with a lot with what Coach Gibbs says and thinks. What metaphor do we use for coaching? What does it look like? And how do we get some success for it instead of just talking about it all the time?
Yeah, it's pretty noisy out there, that's for sure. And it's also really confusing. To your point, is coaching a program? Is it a philosophy? Is it a tactic? I hear these platitudes. Well, everybody should coach. Every manager should coach. Coach. We've got, and there's even technology out there and supporting coaching. Yet, 3% of, I guess probably less than 5%. I don't know if it's 3 to 5% of companies have sales management kind of programs supporting coaching. Even fewer have this idea of coaching as part of the sales manager comp plan. And more importantly, now there's some machine learning and AI coaching. AI sales coaching is a thing, which to me is kind of scary because it's too much artificial and not enough intelligence in the first place. And now we're going to have AI sales coaching. Well, that's going to fix everything. And to Rachel's point, I totally agree with her. It's an underserved, undersupported role. Managers end up being managers because they're great reps, and being a great manager is not the same thing as being a great manager in other professions. Because, Scott, contextually, sales managers have the people management stuff like approving vacations and doing performance reviews, but they're also part of the productivity engine of the company. They have to drive sales revenue, which is a unique role that's not supported by traditional HR functions and other groups that in leadership development. So there's a huge void there. So to answer your question, what is the purpose, or what skills and competencies do you need to have in management in the first place? And there's a raging debate, and the debate is, well, managers should do more coaching versus managers should be deal jockeys and spreadsheet jockeys, and nobody's been able to resolve that. There's there's the idea of we should go do that, but has anybody done the time study to figure out how much time managers are spending on these things? Probably not. So to answer the question first is what do you want from them? What do you want from managers? And I don't know if that helps, but that's the first thing that pops into my head here is this debate that's unresolved. So how can you answer what the hell coaching is if you don't know what the role is supposed to do?
So let me react to that, right? So I'm driving around in my car, and that's a lot of stuff. It's overwhelming, and I'm a sales enablement person, or maybe I'm Rachel. Brian, that stuff sounds like it's all out of my pay grade. What can I do to start adding value? I'm in sales enablement, and I want to enable. We had a recent podcast around the chicken hawk. Remember the chicken hawk? So let's take what you said and let's break this down. And what do I do with this information?
Yeah, well, first you have to understand what coaching is, and also what the purpose is of your sales management team. So tactically,
wait, let me pause. When you say you, is that I need to understand it as a sales enablement practitioner, or do I have to gain agreement with the sales managers and the VP of sales of what sales coaching is?
Yeah, it's both. So to me, you have to gain agreement, understand in your organization what's the expectation of management, and then 2, you have to enable that.
Okay, so talking to Rachel then, Rachel, what I think Brian is saying, and Brian, I'm putting words in your mouth, spit out what doesn't fit. Rachel, what I think Brian is saying to you is, number 1, you need to have a philosophy of what training is. Think about it as a North Star and socialize that. At least make sure your VP of sales supports it. You might have to bring individual sales managers along. Is that step 1?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, is the management team, sales management team, responsible for getting the number? Yes. Okay. Well, what number is it? And 2, trick question, is it through people or for people? I have these discussions with sales leadership. Do you want them to do it for their people or with their people and through their people?
Well, you lost me there. So that the question that I asked you was for Rachel. The first thing is she has to get buy-in, and then you went to the number.
Yeah, that's an example of the buy-in. Like, what's the purpose of the sales manager role? Is to get the number. What does that mean?
But so to whom are we talking to?
To
the VP of sales?
Yeah, to sales leaders. Sales
Okay, so Rachel has to have a perspective of what coaching means, or philosophy, as her North Star.
Right.
She must gain agreement, some minimum agreement with the head of sales about what his expectations are of the frontline sales managers.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, gotcha.
And with that, once there's agreement there, for example, what does it mean to get the number? What does it mean to team to get the number? What's the relationship expectation between reps and managers? What's the VP's expectation of that? What does that look like? And you might have to show a couple of examples. Are you talking about this, Joe Gibbs style? About principles and holding to those principles? Or are you talking about that, where a sales manager jumps in and closes the deal? It's one or the other. Well, I want both. Okay, but in service of what? What purpose? Well, to get the number no matter what. Okay, so what is off limits? What's the scope of that? Nothing. They can do anything they want to actually close the deal. Okay,
so let's pause this real quickly right now. What Brian is talking about in one of the earlier episodes, I wish I could remember which number off the top of my head, but we had a conversation, Brian, about lessons learned from the learning and development world of which you came from, and some of the terminology within it that I just didn't understand coming at it from the sales world. And I think what might be helpful is what it sounds like you're doing is a process to come up with the requirements of me as the sales leader of what I expect from a sales coaching program. But it sounds like you're following a process that's different than Addy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess so. I hadn't thought about it that way. Addy is this typical design process to build curriculum. So I'm not following. Yeah, I'm not following that. I am following a bit of a performance-centric, channeling my inner Joe Gibbs, saying, listen, right? Listen. If I'm going to have managers in the first place, I have an expectation of them. And let me make sure I'm clear. If I'm an enablement person, I need to be clear. And if I'm a sales VP, I need to be clear. What skills and competencies do I need those managers to exhibit? And it's just question mark, stop. And in that, there are two camps. There's the compliance-driven, beat the crap out of reps camp, and then there's the do it with and build team outcomes. Those things are bipolar opposites.
Gotcha. So wait, pause this. So I'm going to go talk back to Rachel. So Rachel, so tying this back to, would love an episode on first line manager onboarding. So what we're saying is the thing that you need to have first is a overall philosophy of what coaching is. Now, the second thing is you need to co-create or help build the requirements. What are the business requirements that the head of sales has, knowing full well, A, they're not going to want to talk about it, and B, they probably don't know off the cuff how to give you what their requirements are. So you're going to have to interview them. And then there's going to have to be a give and take process. And Brian said, instead of Addy saying, tell me what you want and I'll go build it, it's give and take. Is it this or is it that? Yeah, now what Brian's saying.
Conversation will kind of model what we're doing here, right? This might be a little bit frustrating for people to listen to, but this is part of figuring it out as we go, right?
That's
we're
right.
Checking for understanding. We're confirming back. We both have to have some patience here to not just jump to the answer. Scott asked Brian to define sales coaching, and damn it, he hasn't done that yet. Right. We're working on it. Well,
what we're giving you, Rachel, is we're answering these questions that we're dedicated to the first line sales manager onboarding. It's you can go and just go, boom, here's your reboarding program. But
here's a model I got off I see a lot of pictures, right? Here's a picture of it.
Right.
That's not what we're doing.
But if you don't gain buy-in in the beginning, you're not really solving any problems. You're just sort of moving the minutia around. So what we're saying is step one, build a coaching philosophy. Number two is make sure you can define the requirements with your sales leader. Now, step three, Brian's saying, okay, based on that philosophy, what is the impact? You can have a philosophy of you're in service of frontline managers. So that means your style or your program is going to be they elect into it. Or, and so think about that in terms of building a curriculum. It might be you're building a curriculum, a master's curriculum. Or the other one might be compliance oriented. Did sales managers do these things, and we're going to drive them to it? You need to make that choice, but also you need to make sure that that choice has a business reason behind it and also has buy-in from your head of sales.
And is if you want to drive and make sure people follow said philosophy, it needs to be considered helpful by the management team that's going to, supposed to use it or follow it.
Right.
No.
I know we might be feeling anxious. What am I building? But we have to first build requirements.
Yeah.
Starting this stuff from scratch. Okay. Continue, Brian, please.
And then if you have, or when you have that agreement and understanding, I would say that the next step to that then is, well, how are we as enablement going to help managers do those right things and meet those requirements? And that's it. It's a simple question, but there's a lot of options there.
Simple. Sales is simple. Simple is hard.
Yep. And there's a lot of options there. And if you ask people what they like, sales leaders and sales execs, what they're going to say at this point is, well, let's just outsource it. It's easier. No, just kidding. But they do that. But I think it's important if you have a philosophy and a point of view is to bring some options to the table to say, listen, when it comes to helping sales managers do the right things, how about I do a bit of a study here to figure out how they're allocating their time and what they're spending their time on, because you just gave me the requirements. We both agree on it. Let's go see real world, what's happening in the field and how managers are allocating their time.
Right. So if you're listening in, you could tell Rachel was passionate just in the way that she wrote this. So I think one of the things that most of us take for granted who get to see this over and over and over again is taking a athlete, a stud athlete. I mean, there's a reason that Joe Gibbs wasn't considered a great football player, but one of the best coaches, and why we don't hear about Jerry Rice being a great NFL coach. Sometimes if you're a great player, doesn't mean you're a great coach because you don't have empathy of what everybody else doesn't do. And really the idea of a manager is to be able to work and elevate a group of people rather than just be an individual awesome person. And that's something that's very, very difficult if you are one of those individually, the high pros, as Rachel mentioned. If you're a performer, now going in a manager role, you think everybody's going to perform like I do because I know how to perform.
Yeah.
But humans don't work that way. So I think, Rachel, the point that I'm making here is it's really important for you to illuminate that condition exists. So therefore, you can soften the beachhead a little bit and go, maybe we do need a program to help our frontline managers do it, because this is a problem that isn't seen yet, but it's something that people know exists.
Yeah, that's great. And also to Rachel in that, channeling back to Joe Gibbs again, because it's a great analog there. That switch from being a great NASCAR driver, making left-hand turns all the time, and beating the competition versus crew chief or team leader is completely different. Yes, it's helpful to have empathy for the driver or the rep in this case, but it's completely different skill sets. Yeah, and to Scott's point, as an individual seller, I if anybody's had success, and this is how I've netted this out. So listen, if you're driving, this is how I've netted this challenge out. One, if you're a top performer, I guarantee you if a top performer has had to learn how to be a top performer in spite of the system, because they haven't had the help and they've got things on their hard drive, et cetera. They don't turn to their company for help. As a sales manager, you're expected to turn to your company for help. And you're expected to build team outcomes, not rely on your own individual strengths by yourself. And that is a fundamental difference. Relying on the team, building a team, doing it through people, versus giving the corporate support the stiff arm, back to the football analogy, and telling them, no, thank you, I got this. I'm going to go close that deal now with my own marketing content I have on my hard drive. That's the fundamental difference. So you have to actually, as a manager, trust the system around you, which is what Joe Gibbs built. to allow people to be themselves, right? So that's a critical distinction there, Scott. Absolutely.
So I think that's a really important point. So Rachel, let's frame this back out again. But what Brian's talking about, part of in an earlier episode, and we're going to plug it, where we use a Foghorn Leghorn cartoon to talk about stakeholder management. Here's a great opportunity for a give-get. When you become a frontline sales manager, and what I'd ask you to do, Rachel, is interview them just about their day in the life. This is probably today the hardest job in any company. And the reason is they're hit from all directions. And then they get frustrated and say, well, at the end of the day, I'm evaluated by my number. I'm just going to go rogue. Screw the rest of you people. And I think where you can help, by the way, them going rogue is the surest way for them to not be successful. But they might think it's the right way to be successful. It's not, because you don't get any of the resources to make it leverage.
Yeah, they get burned out too, but yeah.
Yeah, and you just sort of chip away. Maybe it helps you squeeze out at the quarter, but it's not long-term sustainable success. So one of the points that we talk about in with the idea of stakeholder management and building that skill is the give to get. Here's why in the world am I going to sign up as a sales manager? Your management program. You're not a sales manager. You're not a successful sales manager. Why should I listen to you? So part of what you need to be able to do is part of the give that you want me to do, and the give. Here's what I get as a frontline sales manager by participating in your program. You're going to pre-configure some resources and help them understand what my job's like. So in other words, you're going to prevent more people from me doing their job. I, as a sales manager, by participating in your coaching program, you've made it easier where instead of having 4 or 5 different pipeline review forms that I got to fill out, I only have to fill out 1. You've taken a thorn out of my paw. Now, as a result of that, I'm going to participate in your coaching program. And you keep making those give gets, and then you build out more and more support for your program because I'm getting something out of it either, rather than just what you want to do, which is reboard me. So I think it's really important that you factor in the story about stakeholder management, heed the advice that Brian's giving you, because going for a frontal assault with a reboarding program, you have to first help make people aware that they have a problem and that they're clear on what problem they're solving. Just because you see it doesn't mean other people see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you got to drop the language on reboarding, because it's like, the world's toughest profession. How would you like to get reboarded back into it? It's like, well, come on. but to what I think you could do is redefine or reclarify, right? I've used this language before. Now that we have an understanding of what's going on, let's reclarify, or just clarify in general. Not necessarily redefine. That gets people a little bit bent out of shape. But if you clarify the role now, so what's the role, and what are the objectives of the role? Whether you call it role profile, job description, whatever, there's a specific set of requirements we've identified. There's a specific philosophy. We've done the time study. We've talked about through people instead of for people. Write it all down and get sign off, not from HR first. That should be the last group to sign off on it. It should be from the sales leadership team and even managers themselves, as to, yes, this is what I would consider the manager of the future, the manager of now. The evolution of this role on paper, as we've discussed, it looks like X. And don't worry about the format and how long it is, but if you don't clarify it on paper, then you can't really say, well, my program supports that, what you all agreed to. And then you give it to HR. So it has to do, my next step then would have to do with redefining, reclarifying the job descriptions to align to the value that needs to be created by management. And then clarifying the next piece, which is, if you're stuck on any of this stuff, here's where you go for help. And our enablement team's here to help you with this. So for example, if the role of manager is to quote unquote go coach, which if you can take a second thing away from this podcast is you got to clarify what you mean by that. So, assume you've clarified all that, what it means to coach. Then here's where you go to get that kind of help. Here's what a day in the life should look like now. And this is the expectation of your day in the life that takes things away and simplifies your view and add things like the rituals, so to speak, that we would expect you to have with your people, the conversations that we would want you to have about customers, the feedback that you would be providing back to marketing groups and product groups and even management around the customer conversations. Now, these are cultural in a lot of instances, but if you're going to take something away, you need to replace it, and that's what this lets you do when you write it down on paper like that. So you can get to the piece where you're enabling instead of just doing to the management team. Do it with them.
Let me give some color on that. One of the things, so it's no big surprise, Brian and I used to work together when we were at Forrester. And we were building a team model, an operating model. We'll talk about operating models later. And one of the things Brian kept bringing up was role clarity. And I was in the leadership role there, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And I said, then let's get everybody together and have everybody build their roles. And Brian said, we have to document. And I was like, what do we need to document? I don't understand. Everybody just said what their roles were. And here's an example of, I understand now what he's talking about. What he's talking about is if you have it on paper, you can actually drive that kind of clarity. And I wanted to move fast, and Brian's words sounded like he was making it slow. What we're talking about here is sort of the same thing. In order for you to go fast, sometimes you have to go slow. And part of going slow is if we're going to roll something out, let's make sure that we have some of those particular details. So it sounds like a lot of words: role clarity, role
ambiguity. Yeah.
I've checked out, honestly, but I know it's as a leader, because it sounds so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Gave me a role profile, walked me through something and why it's important, and walked me through it where I don't feel like I have to create it, which is really what my frustration was in hindsight, Brian, was it felt like you're putting all this work on me rather than showing up and say, hey, one of the challenges that we're going to have is role clarity. I put together an outline of a description to help us manage that. Can I walk you through with that? And I'd have been, wow, that's great. You're being proactive.
Right. And then here's how these roles would drive our value.
Yep.
Right. And here's what each person could expect from each other, because, oh, by the way, the other part of that is we were changing the whole operating model. So we didn't have existing silos to just be proxies. And that's what's happening here. The sales management role is evolving. You can't say that sales managers have a proxy anymore. They don't, because the roles evolve. And if people don't agree that the roles evolve, that's a whole separate discussion. Ping me. But it has. And the reason for that is because customers have evolved, and digital transformations are mandating more cross-functional teaming to drive business results, especially in SaaS companies. So if you're going to redefine the role, you have to understand that there is no proxy for the existing definition, which means you have to write it down and get agreement. And I agree with the proactive part there. Don't put it on management, but show up with, and then explain the why. If we don't define the role, HR will ask us why we are asking people in management roles to do things differently. One, so we're going to manage the risk from a compliance and HR perspective by writing this stuff down. Two, we're going to get better talent that aligns to our strategy, because our talent acquisition team and the recruiting team, I'm going to build a bridge to them. They got to know who to hire for and who to recruit for and what we're looking for. And I'll run meetings with them and with you, if you'd like, to clarify the profile of who we want to hire, because we don't want to hire just anybody. Three, it's going to help me align the onboarding program if that's part of my remit, because I'm going to know who we're getting, and I'm going to build a profile of manager, that a curriculum that drives the profile of manager, So I'm going to build my stuff to equip and help managers look like that on paper. then I'm going to be able to retain managers because I've written this down. Not only will we have entry level, so to speak, management, but we'll have, black belt, Zen Yoda, super awesome management because I've written this down. And I'll be able to build a bridge through that 101, 201, 301, 401 level because I've written this down. So these are things that I'm going to do for you / with you, management team, that's going to manage risk, accelerate our ability to drive our strategy, retain our people, and help our reps get what the help they need. Because that's one of the shifts in the sales management role, is the definition of helping sales people be successful has changed. So we're going to help retain our reps too by writing this down.
So to help us bring this to closure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 3 things that I'm taking away from this, Brian. And there are 3 things that I'm taking away, projecting a lot onto you, Rachel. So I didn't share what your last name is, so you have some anonymity. But my takeaway number 1, if I know sales enablement professionals like I do, many of you are probably feeling pretty anxious about what Brian said. Sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like it's complicated. When did you tell me exactly what to go do? And if you are thinking that, my first question of you is, are you thinking to serve others, or are you thinking about how others can serve you? And I think that's a fundamental question all enablement people should ask. Is you feel pressured to go do something, and then you want a checklist of stuff to go do. But if you did that checklist and pushed it onto people, and you haven't gotten the buy-in, you haven't gotten you haven't gotten the support of what the program is in the first place, you haven't gained all these different things, you're pushing something forward that's going to have no support whatsoever. So basically, your program's going to be stillborn. And you've helped no one. So the goal is, at the end of the day, are you going to evaluate yourself on whether or not you did a whole bunch of stuff and it looks really pretty, good job, but did it drive results? And if you're not doing the kinds of things that Brian's talking about, you're not gaining the internal support, you're not gaining the particular buy-in, and you sure aren't going to get the people using it. Because I got news for you. No matter what kind of mandate you put out for frontline sales coaching, it doesn't work. The frontline sales managers are really good at articulating how things don't work and why they don't have to do it, because they don't have a lot of time. And if the VP of sales hears a lot of it and doesn't have any reason to push back, guess what he's going to do? He's going to say the mandate for coaching is gone. So you've invested a lot of time and energy to roll out a bunch of stuff, to do a whole bunch of checklists that sound super sophisticated and make you look smart, but no one's used it. So the reason that Brian's walking you through all these things is through lessons learned of what works to get people to use it or not. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, along the way, there are many things in our podcast, like the skill of stakeholder management. This is a fantastic opportunity. Tackling something like this that is hard, breaking it down into small steps, and then doing the give-get. Am I in service of you? What do you want? And then also, what can you do to help me? If you keep doing this, this is the way that you build the foundation of support. So if you're brand new and you want to be able to speak, or you want to have the support of sales managers behind you, don't impose something on them. That is the surest way to get a revolt.
I agree.
The way to get the support and to be able to push back on the rest of the organization is you'd want to be able to have a core constituent base. If you want to get that core constituent base, get them to support the idea. Let them, I like to use the idea of let them put their fingerprints on the murder weapon. It's not you, Rachel, having the greatest idea on the planet. It's you've brought the best ideas to bear. Third point, my third reaction to what Brian's saying is, let's follow the narrative here. I think if we're in the zone of always being reactive, we're conditioned to only look at the checklist. Instead of, if we want to be proactive, how do we solve more reactive problems? Pay attention to the stories about how we can, through this process, systematically reduce symptoms or root problems rather than treating symptoms. If we're only listening for what we can go do, we are only treating symptoms. If we are listening actively to all of our constituents in this process and engaging with them and making sure they're buying in every step along the way that Brian talked about, we are moving every day a little bit closer to being proactive. And then that gives you more control of your day-to-day activities. So that way, over time, you don't work 60 hours a week, you work 50 hours a week to eventually you can get to, a reasonable time. So those are the three things, those are my three takeaways of what you shared.
Yeah.
Brian, what are your reactions to that, and close us out with three things that Rich can go do?
Yeah, that's a great recap. Thanks, Scott. And thanks for your help on the front end of this. I tend to jump in and provide direction. And it was really helpful to have you zero me in on the scoping part of the front end of this. So that's also, I'm sure, going to benefit the listeners. So thanks for doing that. I think for me to action this, everyone knows, and I would use the Steven Seagal approach. He's an guy. You use people's momentum against them, right? So when people are coming at you, yeah, you know what? Managers need to coach. Dang right. You know what? Those managers need to do something different. Dang right. But what does that actually mean? And I think that's where you can put the pause here and be really clear on what the behavior changes are expected and what it means to coach, and then get agreement. And to your point with stakeholder management, you're the mouthpiece. You're not the mandate. Sales leadership is the mandate. You're the mouthpiece for that. And you've got the buy-in through the council or whatever before you action. And that way you have a way to get, top cover along the way. So make sure you have that. So leverage the buzzwords to get traction. And then two, think about the Joe Gibbs system view of what performance means. This idea of being a coach and building out the system, it's the new normal. It's not when coaching first started becoming a buzz, it was a task. Make sure you go coach. Make sure you find coachable moments. Go do this thing called coaching. And it came across to 99.9% of managers as yet another thing I have to go do. Then it evolved into, no, it's a mindset. It's something that you should be thinking all the time. But nobody's really redefined what that day in the life or that relationship between managers and reps needs to look like in the new normal. And that's where you can drive clarity, is comparing and contrasting what the expectations were 20 years ago or even 10 years ago or 5 years ago into what they need to be 5 years down the road or even today, with it's zeroing in on the relationship between managers and the reps. And if you have to build a week-long calendar that shows the calendar view of a manager today and a calendar view of a manager after your program, then do that to visualize and compare and contrast the difference there. And then, third is you've got to be curious and you've got to be consultative internally. For example, I hinted at that. My company talks about, managers have to help get enable the strategy or execute the sales strategy. That's the first thing they need to do. Second, they have to be able to help get the number through their people is the third. And the fourth is to drive client value. But in executing the strategy, what does that mean? Getting the number, what do you mean? Through their people, what does that look like? What does that mean? Tactically, tangibly, clearly. And then this idea of capturing more value, what does that mean? And you're going to find that in that conversation, there's not a lot of clarity, and pictures can go a long way, and so can working sessions. But the more clarity you have with these Zen questions, the better off your coaching program is going to be. And I would actually not roll it out as a program so much as a reclarification of the sales manager of the future, so that it doesn't come across as a tactic. So those would be my three things: making sure you get the agreement up front, talking about and redefining or clarifying the new normal, and then making sure you're clear about the requirements of the role of the new manager.
Awesome. So let me close this out. So with one bookend thought, and then we'll wrap up. So Rachel, one of the things that I translated for Brian is saying you need to have a coaching philosophy. And the reason that shopping that is important is, let's go back to Joe Gibbs. Joe Gibbs was an offensive coordinator when he got hired. He had the support of the owner, Jack Kent Cooke, because he had an overall philosophy. By having that overall philosophy, what that did is it gave the owner confidence, because Joe Gibbs' first 5 games was 0-5, unacceptable. Most fans wanted him run out and fired. And those are the things that we need to be able to run into, is by being clear and having a very clear strategy, so that that people support in gives you the opportunity to carry these things out and move forward and keep progressing. So with that, since I was wrapping that up and trying to tie back that back to Gibbs, Rachel, this was a whole podcast for you based on the note that you shared. We'd love to invite you on our show and react to it. If you don't want to do that, if somebody else wants to react to it, was jiving with what Rachel said and say, hey, I'd like to combat or confront the guys or talk through what the heck are you guys talking about? Come and join our show. If you'd like, please send us a note and highlight this. So this was clearly a user recommended story. Tell us how we did. Did we communicate it clear? Did we make our points? What could we do better? How can we make it more packaged and more repeatable? And with that, our episode has concluded. Please do us a favor and share what you thought, what your insights were. Please get 2 or 3 people to listen to it. Drop us a note at engage@insidese.com. When we announce a podcast, do us a favor, like it, share it with your peers, go and rate it, and watch out and subscribe. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Brian. That was an awesome job. I look forward to hearing what folks say about us. And with that, we're out.
Thanks for joining us. To become an insider and amplify your journey, make sure you've subscribed to our show. If you have an idea for what Scott and Brian can cover in a future podcast, or have a story to share, please email them at engage@insidese.com. You can also connect with them online by going to insidese.com, following them on Twitter, or sending them a LinkedIn request.